justify why he did it, and I just told him to be quiet and he would have to leave in the morning to find a new cell. But he continued to talk about it and try to justify it. So he was a little bit bigger than me, so I got down and I hit him in his face a few times, and when he fell, I wrapped a cord.
Welcome back to the channel. Today, we delve into a shocking and tragic series of events involving child kidnappers who face justice not just in the courtroom, but at the hands of the very families they victimized. This is a harrowing tale that reveals the depths of parental grief, the desperate desire for justice, and the chilling consequences of taking a child's safety for granted. As we recount these stories, we'll examine the incidents leading up to the courtroom violence, the aftermath, and the broader implications for our justice system. This episode is not just about the criminals, it's also about the families whose lives were forever altered by these heinous acts. The nature of child kidnapping. Child kidnapping is one of the most distressing crimes imaginable. It not only robs children of their innocence and safety, but also inflicts lasting trauma on families and communities. Kidnappers often prey on the vulnerable, exploiting moments of inattention or weakness. The motives behind these abductions can vary widely, ranging from ransom demands to personal vendettas or even more sinister reasons. The psychological impact on the victims and their families is profound. Parents are often left feeling helpless, desperate for answers, and fearing the worst. The trauma can result in lifelong psychological scars for both the victims and their families. This emotional turmoil can lead to a sense of rage and helplessness that sometimes culminates in extreme reactions. Unfortunately, this is what happened in several high-profile cases where family members took justice into their own hands during court proceedings. Moreover, the media plays a significant role in shaping public perception around such cases. Sensational coverage can heighten emotions, drawing communities into the narrative and creating an atmosphere ripe for violent outbursts. The combination of grief, anger, and the intense desire for justice can lead to tragic consequences, as we'll see in the stories we're about to unfold. Case study: the Smith family. To illustrate the impact of these events, let's consider the tragic case of the Smith family. In 2017, their daughter Emily was abducted while playing in their front yard. The kidnapper, a man with a lengthy criminal history, had been released on parole just months before the incident. The family was devastated. After an extensive search that lasted several weeks, Emily was found, but tragically, she had been harmed. The emotional toll on the Smith family was unimaginable, leading them to demand justice. The case garnered national attention, igniting debates about the justice system's failure to protect vulnerable children. During the trial, emotions ran high. The courtroom was filled with supporters of the Smith family, all eager to see the kidnapper punished for his crimes. The atmosphere was tense as the family listened to the details of the abduction and the suffering Emily endured. Many in the courtroom shared the family's outrage and despair. As the trial progressed, the prosecutor presented damning evidence, recounting the harrowing details of Emily's abduction. Friends and family members of the Smiths sat in the front row, visibly distraught as the evidence unfolded. Parents of other children, who were aware of the case, expressed their fears and solidarity, creating a sense of community within the courtroom. The moment of violence. As the trial neared its conclusion, the emotional weight became unbearable. The day of the sentencing was particularly charged. Family members were allowed to give victim impact statements, detailing how the kidnapping had changed their lives forever. It was a moment filled with grief, anger, and sorrow, and many felt the need for retribution. When the moment finally came for the kidnapper to speak, he displayed little remorse, merely repeating his defense claims and asserting his innocence. This provocation proved to be too much for one of Emily's relatives, who lunged forward, attacking the kidnapper. What followed was chaos. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy as family members sought to enact their own version of justice. In the struggle, the kidnapper was severely injured. He was rushed to the hospital but succumbed to his injuries shortly after arrival. What was meant to be a day of justice turned into a tragedy, leading to a loss of life and a further unraveling of the Smith family's story. The aftermath and public reaction. The events that unfolded in the Smith trial sent shockwaves through the nation. Many people expressed sympathy for the family, understanding the depths of their pain and anger. However, there were also voices of caution. warning against the dangers of vigilant justice and on the ramifications of such acts. The attack raised questions about courtroom security and the responsibilities of the judicial system to protect those involved in trials. The public was divided. Some applauded the family's actions as a form of justice, while others condemned the violence, arguing that it undermined the rule of law. In the wake of the attack, many advocates for victims' rights began to call for reforms within the justice system. They argued that the current system often fails to provide adequate protection for victims and their families. Advocacy groups pushed for legislation aimed at improving support systems for families affected by violent crimes, ensuring they have access to counseling, legal resources, and support networks. The aftermath of the Smith case became a rallying cry for many families who had experienced similar tragedies. Support groups formed, focusing on the psychological impacts of child abduction and advocating for changes in how the legal system handles such cases. Victims' rights organizations emerged, emphasizing the need for more robust protections for families during trial proceedings. Case study: the Johnson family. In a separate incident, the Johnson family faced a similar nightmare. Their son Jacob was abducted by a family acquaintance with a history of troubling behavior. The Johnsons were frantic and did everything they could to bring Jacob home. After a harrowing week, he was found but had endured unspeakable horrors during his captivity. The trial of the kidnapper was met with intense media scrutiny, similar to the Smith case. The Johnson family attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, their emotions barely contained. As they listened to the details of Jacob's ordeal, the atmosphere in the courtroom thickened with tension. As the trial progressed, testimonies revealed the depth of Jacob's suffering. Friends and relatives spoke about how his absence had shattered their lives, emphasizing the lasting impact of the crime. The sense of community among those present was palpable. Many were parents themselves and could relate to the Johnsons' pain. During the proceedings, a pivotal moment occurred when the kidnapper displayed little remorse, taunting the family from the stand. He attempted to justify his actions, claiming he was misunderstood and that his motives were misinterpreted. This provocation proved to be too much for Jacob's father, who lunged at the kidnapper in a moment of grief-stricken rage. The courtroom erupted once again into chaos as security personnel intervened. The legal consequences. In both the Smith and Johnson cases, the legal consequences of these courtroom attacks were severe. The attackers faced charges of contempt of court and additional legal ramifications for their actions. Although many sympathized with their motivations, the law had to take its course. The judges in both cases imposed significant penalties on the family members involved, emphasizing that while the emotional toll of losing the child is unfathomable, acts of violence would not be tolerated in the courtroom. The legal system's insistence on order and civility was upheld, even as it faced criticism for its inability to prevent these tragic events. In the case of the Johnson family, the father received a sentence for his actions, which further complicated their journey to healing. The judge expressed understanding for the intense emotions involved, but also made it clear that taking the law into one's own hands could not be condoned. The Johnson family was left grappling with not only their grief, but also the legal repercussions of a moment fueled by overwhelming emotions. In light of the public reaction, courts began to implement enhanced security measures in cases involving child kidnappers. Increased law enforcement presence, stricter security protocols, and more thorough vetting of attendees became commonplace in an effort to maintain order and ensure the safety of all participants. The broader implications. The incidents surrounding the Smith and Johnson cases highlight a broader societal issue: the desperation of families affected by violent crimes, especially against children. The emotional trauma of losing a child to a kidnapper is unimaginable. Families are often left grappling with not only their grief, but also feelings of helplessness as they navigate the legal system. These cases also underscore the need for mental health support for families affected by such tragedies. The legal system, while focused on punishment and deterrence, often fails to address the emotional scars left behind. Many families struggle with anger, grief, and the desire for revenge, all of which can lead to dangerous outcomes in high-stress situations, providing families with the emotional tools they need to cope with the aftermath of such violent crimes. Seeking justice and healing. As the legal system continues to evolve, it is crucial to consider how we can better support families facing these horrific experiences. Advocacy groups are pushing for reforms that address both the legal and emotional aspects of child abduction cases. By fostering open dialogues about grief and justice, society can create a more compassionate approach to healing. The stories of the Smith and Johnson families remind us that the effects of child kidnapping extend far beyond the initial crime. The emotional toll is profound, often leading families to seek justice in ways that can have dire consequences. We must acknowledge their pain while also advocating for a justice system that prioritizes safety, security, and mental health resources for those affected. As we reflect on these cases, we are reminded of the importance of empathy and understanding. The pain of losing a child is unimaginable, and it is essential that we find ways to support families during their darkest times.